Welcome to Driving the Line, the pursuit of safety, where we talk about the real issues out on the road, focus on safe driving, and learn industry best practices from your hosts Kenny Ray, Mike Bohan, and Jim Seibert, in the hopes that by driving the line, we get more drivers home safe and sound. This podcast was made possible by Marsh McLennan Agency.
Well, welcome everybody to Driving the Line. This is Mike Bohan, and I've got Kenny Ray and Jim Seibert here with me, my esteemed colleagues and co-host, but more importantly, just my good buddies. And as always, we're glad to have you join us this morning, and we're really thankful that you're listeners of our podcast. We can't say that enough. I know we say that almost every time we get on here, but we truly do thank you all for coming on, joining us, listening in. And we certainly hope you're enjoying what you're hearing. And guys, we're coming up on a year that our podcast has been out, and we've had a couple of episodes a month during that time. And you know what? I think I could speak for everybody when I say it's been a pretty fun ride. You know, we've had a lot of good times. We've had a lot of really, really good conversations. And as our first year is coming to a close, I think all of us, Jim, Kenny, Aaron, Amanda, and I, we've all been kind of looking back, reflecting on what we've done, some of our successes, maybe some of our failures. And we've honestly already been planning on what next year is going to look like, some of the things we're going to do, some of the plans we've got. And I think everyone out there today in the trucking industry runs into the same type of thought process when you're closing out your end of the year business. You know, you're getting your tax information gathered up, getting your paperwork organized there, IFTA filings. Maybe you're looking at purchasing some new equipment, closing out some business deals or some business records, you know, taking care of some of those legal issues that come around every year. And that's stuff that's all kind of on your mind when the year ends. But today on Driving the Line, just like every day when we come on this podcast, we're going to be focusing on the safety aspect of this industry and the safety aspect of your companies and what it might look like at the end of the year as we look back over that 12 months to see your successes and your failures as you're looking at your company, or what some of the wins or losses were for the industry as a whole. So then I'm hoping we'll be able to take a look forward to see what the new year has for us as well. But I think it's important for us to start with reflection, to see where we've come from, to see those challenges we've had over the last 12 months, the hurdles we've had to jump, those mountains we've had to climb. You know, certainly the lessons we've learned when we've swung and missed, and also maybe some lessons we've learned when we hit it out of the park, because we don't want to go into this next year flying blind. And by that, I mean, we don't want to keep making the same mistakes over and over if there were mistakes that might be costing us drivers, might be costing us customers, maybe hurting our safety rating. We need to be able to look back, make some adjustments, and continue to get better. And we certainly don't want to miss any opportunities where we had great success, but nobody really paid attention to how we got there. And we don't know how to replicate the success that we had. That's something that's going to be very important for all of us, both as companies, as individuals. It's important for us to be able to do that, and look back to see where we've been and continue to get better. For example, if you're a company out there and you had great driver retention over the last year and your culture was improving, but nobody in your company really knows how or why that's happening, then you might have an issue where you miss an opportunity to sustain that future improvement. Or, you know, I'll give you an analogy, a sports analogy. You guys know I'm a dad of 3 sons. I loved watching my boys play sports. They played multiple sports when they were in school, but football was my favorite sport to watch them play. I love the sport of football. I love watching college football on TV, but there's just nothing quite like those Friday night lights, watching a couple high school teams come out and battle it out. And if you're a coach of those teams and you get your team out on the field, you've prepped all week, you've scouted that opponent, you know what they're going to do. And let's say you come out on defense and you're ready to go. You've prepped, you've got your guys ready, and that opponent then starts throwing an offensive formation at you that you didn't practice for that week. It's something new that they put in their game plan. So, well, then you as a coach, you have to start making adjustments on the fly based on what you're seeing during the game. So you did your prep work. You got your team where they needed to be based on what you knew from the scouting, what the history that you saw of that team. But then you also had to make some adjustments as the game was unfolding. You had to pay attention to what had happened in the past, and you have to pay attention to what's happening right now. And it's similar to what we're talking about here today in the trucking industry. It's preparing for the things we can prepare for based on what we know of the past. And then as we move forward, we get our team in position to have the most success that they can based on the information that we've got at the time. So I'm going to punt it over to my colleagues here and just ask you guys, where do we start here? When we're looking at the last 12 months, when we're talking about reflecting on what the trucking industry's been through, or maybe just what you guys have been through, what are some of the things that you've been thinking about?
One thing I think that we need to make sure that our listeners understand is that this is not just a sentimental, suggestion that we're saying, well, find you a quiet place and get a cup of coffee or a glass of tea and sit down and kind of look back over the year and just for the good memories. There needs to be some intentionality about this. I actually read a very interesting article the other day that some researchers at Harvard, and whether you support Harvard or not, they were some brilliant people there, whether you agree with them philosophically or not. But one thing that the Harvard Business School studied was the difference between leaders that look back over a certain period of time and intentionally reflect on their wins and their losses, the experiences they had during that time frame, whatever it is. And here we are, we're at the end of 2023, and we're suggesting to our listeners that you basically turn around, if you will, and look in retrospect at the year 2023 and what all's gone on this year. But the Harvard Business School found that if leaders will turn around and look and look at their wins and their losses, their experiences, their observations that they made during that time, and then not just look at those as saying, okay, I remember that happened, but do it with intentionality. And the intentionality is this: what did I learn from that? So you're reflecting on it for understanding. You're actually, there's an analysis to this. It's not just saying, oh, we had this happen, but you pause and say, okay, that happened. What did I learn from that? And the reason you want to have the understanding, the reason you want to have the learning is because that contributes to your future growth, personally, professionally, corporately, as your company. There's that old adage about that people that fail to learn or remember history are doomed to repeat it forever. And so that wasn't just a cute little saying some history professor came up with. That's based on real life. If we can't look back and learn both from our mistakes and from our wins, I mean, it's important that we don't just look back in a negative through the filter of negativity, but look back and try to be as objective as we can. Okay, what happened during the year? What were my wins? What were my losses? What were the experiences I had personally? What was the experiences I had professionally? What was the experiences we went through as a company? What things did I observe about my employees, my drivers, my staff, the industry as a whole? But just you basically analyze things that happen with a goal. And the goal is, what did I learn from that? What do I understand from that? And my learning and my understanding from that leads me to be in the future, a better driver, a better safety director, a better owner of a company, a better CEO, a better maintenance director. Whatever my role is, I actually can self-improve, professionally improve, corporately improve by looking back at these events that have occurred, the experiences I've had, these wins and these losses, and finding out what did I learn from those things? What do I understand from those events? And then I go back to telling you about the Harvard study, and I want to close the loop on this. What that study found was that those individuals that do that, they do this intentional reflection with the goal of understanding and learning. It ends up being the dividing line, the line in the sand, if you will, between somebody who is an extraordinary leader in whatever their role is. It can be a truck driver, it can be a maintenance director, it can be a safety director, be the owner of the company. But people that do that tend to fall in the category of extraordinary, versus the ones that don't do that tend to fall in the category, and I don't mean this derogatorily, it's the very word that the Harvard Business School used. They're mediocre, they're average, they're not leveraging the advantage of looking back retrospectively at those experiences, those observations, those wins and losses. And it's almost like that you have an opportunity to attend a fantastic learning session and you just arbitrarily choose not to go. And so it was amazing that, the three of us feel like it's very important to do that. But we actually now have empirical research that shows the people that do that tend to be more successful in whatever role they're in versus those that don't. So I don't think it's just something we should, picture ourselves sitting in an easy chair with a glass of tea, reflecting on the year. This is part of your professional development. This is part of the growth of your company, the growth of you individually. This is something you need to do to look back over 2023, because it's going to make you better in 2024.
Yeah, and I think when Kenny, is you're talking about that intentional reflection and looking deep into what's going on at your company or maybe with you individually, our industry is full of data for us to utilize. We've got lots of technology that companies are using in their trucks that have data that we can utilize to look at and learn from and get better. The FMCSA has their SMS system, the CSA program, or that SMS site. They provide us with data, their roadside information. And that's part of the reflection that we're talking about. That's some of the stuff. Obviously, we don't want to say wait till the end of the year to look at that. But as you're looking at that, look over a 12-month window. Don't just look at a 1-month snapshot and say, well, this is what our score is. Well, what's it been over the last 6 months? What's it been over the last 12 months? Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? What are we doing as a company? If it's getting better, great. What are we doing? If it's getting worse, okay, what are we doing? Figure that stuff out, but look at the data and see what it says. And then if you're having the success, figure out why you're having that and begin to replicate that. If you're not having success, then get the heads together in your company and say, what are we going to do to fix this? What is our problem? Where's the breakdown? Why is this becoming an issue for us? And then whether it's, updating our vehicles or maybe adding more maintenance staff or, whatever it may be, if we're having issues with our trucks, start brainstorming and looking at those and solving those problems based on the data that you see.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like, are we getting lucky or are we getting unlucky? And if we're getting lucky, how and what are we doing that's causing the luck to happen? How can we make that an intentional piece of our workplace? Unlucky, nobody tries to intentionally be unlucky. So when we've got this data here, unlucky is just, it's not something that happens naturally. So what are we missing when we're out there performing our job? You guys are not leaving me much room to add to this conversation here. But when I was preparing for our talk today, I got to thinking about the leading and lagging indicators. And I think Mike's going to hit on that maybe a little bit more here, but when we in our safety profession start talking about leading and lagging indicators, it can get really blurry in a hurry. And what's causing this? What's not causing it? Things like the cause and effect of everything can be overanalyzed or underanalyzed. And Mike, it's great that you shared those resources for folks to go out and really dive into some numbers. I look at things from the OSHA eyes of, let's talk about our own podcast here. What have we discussed that could be a refreshing tool for those at the end of the year to maybe go back and hit on and kind of incorporate into, okay, this happened in the past year. How do I kind of emphasize it and push it forward? Well, we talked about one of our very, very first podcasts was safety as a core value, right? What's safety as a core value really mean? Can I take that podcast? Can I take that sentiment and make it a core value of the company? Talked about the general industry standards of from OSHA and how it's applicable to the trucking industry, distracted driving, summer's heat, OSHA's national emphasis program. We talked about regulatory audits. There's some nuggets hitting on things throughout this past year that we can take, analyze, and bring forward. And then also reflecting on what our key incidents or near misses were this past year and what safety training programs do we may have that we need to refresh the program and re-roll it out. What do we have that can help negate those near misses or incidents going into the new year? So that reflection and maybe using some of these resources that we've provided, some of the links from the previous podcast, looking at those incidents, looking at those near misses, saying what holes do we have in our current programs that caused that unluck to happen? And how do we change that to be intentional into the next year? So things that are applicable from the general industries. As I'm traveling the countryside, emergency action plans, hey, that's a requirement for general industries. I find them to be very, very generic, not company specific or site specific. There's a lack of uniformity from node to node as these companies are spread out. Elevated work, vehicle mounted work platforms, PPE. This list for general industries and the annual training requirements can go on. Electrical safety related work practices, noise exposure. There's many, many things that, and I can just keep rambling, but I'll stop there. There's many programs that you might have in place, but judging by this last year's performance and looking at those near misses or incidents, you can see if the current program you have is getting the job done. And if it's not, what do we have to change?
You know, Jim, and then I'll yield to Mike, but when we first decided to include you as our OSHA guru, even though you come out of the agriculture sector and we're in a transportation podcast, part of that was, and it's been absolute success, was to have you on here regularly reminding these trucking companies, guess what? You think FMCSA or PHMSA are the only people that regulate you, you're wrong. You are smack dab in the middle of OSHA's wheelhouse. And I can't tell you, and Mike can support this as well. When Mike and I are out visiting with trucking companies and I get feedback on our podcast, I don't know how many of them have said, man, that OSHA guy, he made me think about this. And so while we're doing this reflecting on 2023, and you just went down, and you only named a few, you didn't name them all, but some of the podcasts that we did that hit on those OSHA topics, when we're talking about this reflecting on the previous year and being intentional about that, one of the things a lot of trucking companies need to do is, how am I in terms of OSHA compliance? And you know, you mentioned when you see emergency action plans, and you said Some of them are so generic, they're not site specific. They haven't been updated. Mike and I are sitting here grinning saying, or they don't exist at all.
Yeah, or they don't have
That's
them.
the biggest problem in the trucking industry. We'll be in a motor carrier and say, do you have an emergency action plan? And they'll say, what's that? And we know that they don't. So kudos to you, my friend, for causing all of us to pause and look back and think about those general safety principles outside of our truck specific things that we need to be so intentional about. Great job.
Well, and as you guys were talking, Jim, you mentioned leading and lagging indicators a little bit. I'm not going to get into that a ton, but you kind of hit on it. It's like, and I simplify it dramatically because, our lagging indicators, that's the stuff we look at and it's happened. Our leading indicators, that's going to be potential issues, things like that, or those near misses. And I think that's when we're talking about reflection and then what we're going to do in the future, that's the stuff we're looking at. And the example I always give on this, and I simplified a little bit. If we go out and we say, we're going to look at our unsafe driving basic, and boy, we've got some speeding issues there. And then we go into our telematics or our ELD system and our camera system we might have in our truck. And it says, we've got some following distance issues, that kind of stuff. Well, we look at those lagging indicators from our violations, but then the stuff that's coming from our technology, and we can say, well, if we're having speeding issues and we're having following distance issues, this is kind of a recipe for some rear end crashes. And we may not had any rear end crashes yet, but they may be coming. We're going to have to start dealing with these issues, or we've got some potential issues coming down the road that are going to cost us some money. And so that's, to me, that's as we're going through this and talking about looking back, Kenny hit it right on the nose, and Jim did as well. We're talking about figuring out where we've been and where we're at. That kind of catapults us into what we're going to do in the future, because a lot of times it's we don't want to just pull something out of the air and say, well, this is what our plan is for the next year. A lot of times it's looking at where we're at and then saying, okay, this is where we're going. Now, some of the stuff, as Jim mentioned, these are annual things. I mean, I know in the trucking world with the FMCSA, their regulations, we've got annual things we have to do every year as well. Obviously, regulatory requirements, the simple stuff like running MVRs, the annual queries in the clearinghouse, inspections on our trucks, that stuff all has to be done every year. So we know that's going to be coming up. But a lot of the stuff, when we look forward to the coming year or the coming months, it's, okay, here's where we've been. This is where we're at. Where do we want to get? And that's moving forward, right? Does that make sense what I'm saying, guys? I mean, is that
absolutely?
It's kind of a process that we go through where we're saying it's not just, well, we'd like to be here and we just pull out an idea out of the air. There's intent in our decisions, and it's based on the knowledge that we have of where we've been and where we're currently at.
And again, Mike, that research shows that intentionality, that doing what you just described, is the deciding factor, one of the major deciding factors between whether somebody's going to be extraordinary or whether they're going to be average or mediocre. So this isn't just something we're encouraging people to do just for the fun of it. It's important to the future growth for them individually, professionally, and corporately for their company. And I want to share with you one last thought, and then I know we need to wrap up. You started off with that football analogy, and like you, I love both high school and college ball. I don't care much for the pro game, but I love Friday night high school. It's almost a religion in Texas, and I don't mean that sacrilegiously, but you'll find entire towns on Friday night at the football stadium. And I'm sure it's that way in Oklahoma, Missouri as well. And then Saturday is purely for college football. But, the analogy you used is the team that was on defense. They had prepared all week. They had watched films. Some of their coaches had gone the previous week to the other team's game and actually scouted them. And you get out on the football field, and then they bring their offense out and they run a formation or a play you never saw before. And that's the two. To me, that epitomizes, that's representative of the two things that we're talking about people doing. The defense was having to react. That's almost a negative connotation. They're having to respond to something that they hadn't seen. And yet on the offensive side, they were creative. They were building off of something. They practiced all week long with a brand new formation. And on Monday, their kids didn't know that formation. Their kids didn't know that play. So they had to gear up for that. So they were looking at what they had done previously and building on that. And then the team that really had expected them just to maintain the status quo was caught basically with their cleats tied together when they came out with something brand new. So in my mind, that epitomizes looking back at let's build on our wins and let's learn from our losses, and let's be intentional about moving forward that so we can step across that line from being average or mediocre to being extraordinary.
Absolutely. Well, guys, we're coming close on the end of this episode. Anything else, Jim, Kenny, anything else you want to throw out there?
No, great discussion. And it's been a good year. Golly, I've loved doing these podcasts with you guys, and already looking forward to the great lineup of topics we got coming up for 2024.
Yeah, I second that. Mike, you and I just previously to this podcast, we were talking about tightening the shot group. And when if you ever patterned a shotgun, you can't get those pellets or the shot to hit the same hole every single time, right? As it spreads out around that piece of cardboard or that little turkey picture that's out there, all the pellets spread out based on the distance that you got. Well, how do you tighten that shot group? Sometimes you have to change the choke in the end of the shotgun, and that squeezes everything together. And yeah, it's never going to hit the same hole, but when you come at it with a plan, when you regroup, when you analyze the pattern that's on the piece of paper, whether it makes sense or it doesn't, you can identify that we've got to do something different. And sometimes that's just changing the choke and tightening up the group and making things a little bit more centralized. And whether that analogy helps some others, I love the football comparison. This has been a great year. It's been so fun to talk with you guys on a regular basis about something we're passionate for. And it's this industry and it's this group of safety professionals, because if you work in general industries, you're a safety professional. And so it's just been great. And I look forward to next year.
Agree 100%. I thank you both. I've had a great time this year with you guys on the podcast. Amanda, we want to thank you for what you do. Aaron, we want to thank you for what you do. Without those two ladies, we are lost. To put it simply, we're lost, and they are just such a tremendous support to us, and we appreciate them so much. But Jim and Kenny, I just respect you guys immensely and appreciate your expertise, but also appreciate your friendship and what you do for our industry. And let's keep moving forward. To all of our listeners out there, I'm just going to encourage you guys at the end of this podcast to, at the end of this year, as it's coming to a close, when you're reflecting, do it with intent. And as you're moving forward, let's make some decisions. As Jim said, let's tighten that choke down and do some things where we're getting better based on educated responses to maybe some of the issues we've had over the last 12 months. And I would just really encourage you to take that 12-month look and really look at not just the failures, but Kenny said this before, look at some of the successes you've had too. Celebrate those. And again, we want you to replicate that because we want you guys to be as absolutely successful as you possibly can be. So for all of us here at Driving the Line, we want to thank you guys for listening in, and we sure do hope you join us next time.
That's all the time we have for this episode of Driving the Line, the Pursuit of Safety. We hope you enjoyed our discussion, and thank you for listening. You can rate, review, and subscribe to Driving the Line, the Pursuit of Safety on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or any other app you're using. You can also follow Marsh McLennan Agency on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. Until next time, thanks again for listening. Drive safely, everyone.